Okay, so like everyone knows saying goodbye is hard, like really tough, especially when it comes to relationships, And obviously every relationship's different, but there's this fictional podcast we're looking at today called The Hard Truth, Finding the Courage to Say Goodbye. And it really seems to get into this whole process of ending
Yeah,
things.
what I find really interesting about this series is how much it focuses on like the emotional side of breaking up. It's not just about the actual breakup itself. It's about understanding why you're feeling the way you are, A and D, how it's going to affect the other person too.
Right. It's like sometimes the hardest goodbyes are the ones we got to say to relationships we thought would last forever.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting how this podcast doesn't just jump right into the breakup part. They really take it from the beginning, huh?
Totally. Like they actually spend a lot of time on like those early signs that maybe things are going wrong.
Yeah.
There's even a whole episode on it called The Weight of Silence about how avoiding these tough conversations can really backfire.
Yeah.
Have you ever felt that pressure to just not say anything, even if something's bugging you in a relationship?
Oh, absolutely. Like 100%. I think we've all been there, right? Like, ugh, is this even worth bringing up? But what's kind of cool is this podcast is like, nope, you got to talk about it. They're basically saying that staying silent can actually make things worse in the long run.
Yeah. It's like sweeping stuff under the rug.
Yeah.
Eventually there's just too much under there and you're going to trip.
It becomes this big thing you can't ignore.
Right. And that's where things get, well, kind of messy. Because this podcast talks about how if you keep all these emotions bottled up, it can turn into resentment. It creates this distance between you. It's not about picking fights. It's about actually talking about your worries before they become huge deals.
So, okay, let's say you're listening to this thing and you start realizing, oh crap, I'm seeing those same red flags in my own relationship. Like, it's time for that. We need to talk. Just thinking about it makes my stomach turn. But this podcast, it actually gives you a whole episode on like preparing for the conversation. They even talk about role playing what you're going to say. It's kind of like they're holding your hand through this super awkward, scary thing.
And that's what's so cool about it. They really get into the details because being prepared for these kinds of conversations is so, so important. If you can at least practice what you want to say in your head, it can make a huge difference. Like instead of a screaming match, you might actually have a conversation where you both feel heard.
Totally.
And even if you do everything right, breaking up is still going to be hard.
Yeah, for sure. It's like we always think about loss as something that happens when someone dies, but ending a relationship, even if it's the right thing to do, it's still a loss, right?
It is 100%. And this podcast, they actually get that. Like in episode 7, they focus on what happens after the breakup, how important it is to take care of yourself. They talk about letting yourself feel everything, sadness, anger, even relief, because it's all part of healing and moving on.
That's so true. It's like we don't always give ourselves permission to grieve a relationship. There's this pressure to just like get over it and be fine. But this podcast is saying, hey, slow down.
Exactly. It's more about being mindful,
Yeah.
right? They're big on finding people you trust and leaning on them, doing things that make you feel good because healing takes time. You can't just rush it. It's about going through those emotions so you can actually grow from it.
Speaking of growth, the outline you sent me mentioned how this podcast doesn't just stop at the breakup. They have a few episodes about moving on, which I thought was really cool. But there's this one part I wanted to ask you about. They have an episode about lessons learned, and I don't know, something about that makes me kind of nervous. Like, is thinking about the past really helpful when you're trying to move forward?
That's a good question. I can see why you'd wonder about that. But I actually think this podcast might be onto something. It's not about like dwelling on who messed up or rehashing old fights. It's more about reflecting, understanding what happened so you can learn from it. Not to punish yourself or even the other person, but to grow. They even call it growth through pain, which is kind of a powerful way to think about it.
So it's more about understanding what you need, what you won't put up with, so you can have something better in the future.
Yeah, exactly. And that can make a huge difference, not just in romantic relationships, but in life, period. Like imagine going through something really tough with someone and coming out of it really knowing yourself, knowing what you want in a partner. That's huge, right?
Yeah, no, totally. It's like you go through this rough breakup, but you come out stronger, knowing yourself better.
Exactly. And that's what I love about this podcast. Like they get that heartbreak sucks, but it's not the end of your story. That's what those last episodes are all about. Not just moving on, but moving forward.
Right. And they even talk about dating again, which, let's be real, after a bad breakup, that can seem kind of terrifying.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
It's scary putting yourselves out there again.
Yeah.
But this podcast, they really get it. Like, they understand those fears, but they also give you some good advice for getting back out there, when you're ready.
It's like they thought of every single thing you could be feeling during a breakup, from those first doubts to that whole mess afterward, and then finally to actually healing and figuring yourself out. Is that what you liked best about this outline?
Definitely. Well, that and remember how they had that episode where they share listener stories? Like hearing from actual people who've gone through the same thing, talking about their own breakups and how they got through it.
Yeah.
I think that would be so powerful.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Because it's like, okay, I'm not alone in this. It's kind of comforting knowing other people have gone through this whole thing, made it out, and are doing okay.
Right. It shows you there's no right way to get over a breakup. Everyone handles it differently. It's your own journey.
This whole deep dive has been really eye-opening. We went from freaking out about that we need to talk conversation to realizing that breakups, even though they hurt, can actually be a good thing. Wild.
Yeah, it really makes you think, this podcast, they took this thing that's so complicated and painful, and they somehow made it hopeful.
Totally. And for anyone listening who's maybe struggling in their own relationship right now, just remember, talk to each other, be kind to yourselves, and don't be afraid to ask for help. And hey, maybe this whole lessons learned thing, maybe it can help you build something even better for yourself down the road.
Absolutely. Because even though it hurts, sometimes ending a relationship can be the best thing for you in the long run.
This has been a lot. For everyone listening, we'd love to hear what you think. Have you ever gone through a breakup that you thought was the end of the world, but actually turned out to be this, turning point in your life? Let us know. Until next time, keep asking those tough questions, and we'll be here to dive into them with you.